Kindred UMC live show features adults discussing adult topics, occasionally with adult language. It may not be suitable for young viewers. Please use discretion before watching.
Hello all, welcome once again to the Kindred UMC pre-recorded live show, coming to you not live but pre-recorded from Kindred Studio A, aka my front room. My name is Chris Hayden. I am the pastor at Kindred UMC.
Hi, I'm Courtney Young. I'm the Director of Community Engagement at Kindred UMC.
And I'm Chloe Artrup, a guest. Am I supposed to say something?
Chloe Artrup, a guest.
No, that was beautiful.
Perfect.
Perfect.
The lovely and talented Chloe Artrup is a guest. And Preston's out, so she's filling in. We are on our way. We are hurtling towards Easter. And even though we're not right now, because we're pre-recording, we will be when this comes out. We're just a couple weeks away, and we are in the middle of a sermon series about the very last week, and especially how it's depicted in the book of Mark, because there's 4 different gospels and they depict it differently. And we are, we're kind of at the, like, we're in the hot zone. Yeah. And I had to make some pretty significant choices because there's only so many Sundays in Lent.
I feel like this is like a bachelor rose ceremony for you. Like you're looking at all the different things you could talk about, and you had to pick who to give your rose to.
Last Supper did not make the cut, unfortunately. Wow. So we're having to skip over a couple of important parts of Mark, but the Last Supper is that leads into communion and Eucharist, and we could do a whole series on that. That's the theology of that is so thick and complicated and mysterious and woo-woo that, we could do several weeks on that. So I was like, well, let's cut that one out. Maybe we'll come back to it later. So we are going to be looking at, this week, the prayer at Gethsemane. Which is this. So essentially what happens is if you do not remember, please go back and watch last week's again. We could use the views. But last week we talked about, Judas is going to betray Jesus. He has made the decision that he is going to do that. And immediately after that, we go to the Last Supper, where Jesus and his disciples, and also it's interesting, Mark makes a point to say that his disciples are also female. Mark very overtly, yes, many women were following him. And I don't know how that turned into we lost that somehow over the years. And but yeah, there were a few different Marys that were his disciples, and then a bunch, it makes a point to say Marys. And so anyway, he's having the Last Supper with all of those people, not just the 12 disciples, but all of those people who are all his disciples. And he institutes, of the Passover meal, he institutes the Eucharist. And, we'll have to do that again. But right after that, they kind of go for a walk. And Jesus has been explicit, this is going to be my last night. They're going to arrest me. They're going to crucify me. And then I'm going to come back from the dead. He said it out loud to them, and they're still oh, Jesus. You say the craziest things, they're just not paying attention to that. And even at the Passover meal, he says, you're going to betray me and you're going to deny me. And he's pointing at no, this is all going to go to pot. This is not going to go well. Trust me, Mm-hmm. And so right after that, he goes kind of on a walk with his disciples, and then he picks out a few of them to go off privately. And he has this very desperate, heartfelt prayer to God. Please change the trajectory I'm on. I don't want to do this. And he asks these 4 disciples to stay awake with him just because it's his last night. He's will you just be with me? And they can't. And they fall asleep, and they so that's the text we're going to read. Okay. This is Mark chapter 14, verses 32 through 42. It goes like this. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. He took with him Peter and James and John. I think I said 4 earlier. I was including Jesus in that, who is not a disciple of Jesus. he's Jesus. Peter, James, and John, and Jesus, and began to be distressed and agitated. And he said to them, I am deeply grieved even to death. Remain here and keep awake. And going a little further, he threw himself on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. He said, Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me. Cup language, he literally just instituted the Last Supper and Eucharist, and the cup of Elijah was the cup that he used that's the cup we drink from every time we share communion. So Mark is kind of like running with a theme here. Abba, Father, for you are all things are possible. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I want, but what you want. He came and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, Simon, his name was also Simon. In fact, that was his given name. He nicknamed him Peter. Simon, are you asleep? Could you not keep awake 1 hour? Keep awake and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And once more he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know what to say to him. He came a third time and said to them, Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Enough, the hour has come. The Son of Man, or I prefer the translation, the human one, which is how Jesus refers to himself a lot. The human one is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand. And Judas is about to betray him, and he's about to be arrested. There's two things happening here that are important things for us to focus on. And so this is a little not as cohesive. There's not like one thing I want to there's like two things. One is Jesus' prayer. Jesus prays for another way, like a way out, basically. And obviously it doesn't work, and he ends that prayer with not what I want, but what you want. And so I want to start there. Like, have you ever prayed and had the answer either had it be unanswered or had it be no? I think about that because one of the examples that comes to mind for me, well, I remember when I was a teenager, I had a huge crush on an older girl, and I remember just desperately praying, and of course it was no, she didn't like me, and I mean she did like me. We were friends. We actually used to go out dancing all the time. But I was just so desperately in love, and of course that would have been a terrible thing if I had gotten my wish. It would have been terrible for her for sure. But it also would have been terrible for me because I was just this. It was a bad version of what I considered to be love. And if that had been what I learned love was, that would have been terrible for the rest of my life. And so it was this, certainly not to the point of grief and death, but it was this horrible thing that I had to reconcile in my teenager, because I felt so strongly that was but I like her so much. Why would I like her so much if God didn't want us to be together?
Yeah.
It was and it was no, don't, no. You can't have that, no. So what comes to mind when you think about unanswered prayers?
This is the example my brain is pulling at, and I was racking and thinking about it, but it's what's on my mind currently. And I've talked about this kind of briefly before, but when I first started coming to Kindred and I first started being open about my own voice and kind of making some shifts in who I was and starting to trust my own voice more, that's the way I like to describe it. I had these friends from previous churches, previous cultures this, that, and the other, that I was so close with.
Tell everyone their names right now and addresses. And
absolutely
phone
not.
numbers.
That I was close with for a long time, but I was close with them within the context of the church I was a part of. And then as I started coming into my own and like being confident in who I am, I noticed those friendships naturally start to like distance themselves. I got told a lot like, oh, like you're changing, like you're the, not necessarily the problem, but that felt like the context behind what they were saying. And so I found myself in this place of like really wanting those things to happen, or those friendships to work themselves out, or to be better, or to change, or to go back to the way they were. And I was literally just talking with Matt about this today, and how like I was like, oh, I'm so like kind of frustrated by the way some of those things have played out. Like I really like, we had multiple conversations and I took a lot of the blame, and I like beat myself up for a lot of it, and like I would do it differently if it were, you know, up to me at this point. And Matt was kind of like, okay, well, like, what is it that you're like, you feel like you're still angry about? Because you said you're still angry. Like, what is it? And it was like, I'm coming to this reality that like, for a long time I've said, oh, I'm not sure if I want to be friends with these people. I'm not like, I want to make it work, but I can't. And like, the place I'm in now is like, no, I know in my heart of hearts that those friendships are over. That doesn't mean they were terrible friendships, but they just aren't my friends anymore. And like, instead of just grieving,
I suspect, and correct me if I'm wrong, because what it would take to remain friends with them would be some form of self-denial.
Right.
Like that is not what God intends for you.
Yeah. And like the place that I've been in is like, because Matt directly asked me, he was like, well, do you still want to be their friends? And for a long time, my answer's been, I don't know, maybe, kind of, I'm not sure. And like today, the thing I said was like, no.
Yeah.
I don't. And like, so now for a long time, I've been in this place of like praying for that to get better, and like grieving, like just getting upset every time they do something like annoying or nasty or like frustrating. And now it's kind of like, well, now the grief is in, no, those friendships aren't there anymore. And that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I identify with that a lot. Like there are people that I really would enjoy being friends with if I could still be myself. Like and it's, we've talked about it before, like it's one thing to be like, I'll compromise and meet you halfway. And it's another thing to be like, I'd sell my soul to be friend. And like when we get into that in-betweeny place of like sell my soul, that's when it's like walk away, back out of the room, you know? Yeah, I identify with that. Chloe, have unanswered prayers, answers to prayers being no, what comes up for you?
So what just immediately came to mind was something that happened years ago. So when I immediately moved to college, it was like I was so close to my family, and I had been dating my current boyfriend, but at the time we'd only been dating like 8 months, and I was so set on leaving home and going away for college because I knew I felt a calling to like go to the school that I went to. And then immediately after the first summer, I was miserable. Like the whole first summer I was miserable, and I remember just praying to God, looking up on how to transfer home, just thinking I made the biggest mistake and it wasn't a calling, and I mistaked what I thought God wanted for my life, and just prayed and prayed and prayed that I could just like find a way to get home because I had no community here, yada, yada, yada. Well, fast forward, I mean, I'm still at the current school doing my doctorate, and I can't even imagine my life, what my life would have looked like if I would have stayed. And meaning if I would have went home. Yeah. Like I was kind of just ignoring the call to, because I felt it initially when I applied and I went, even though I knew it was hard, I just wouldn't have grown if I would have went back. I was kind of ignoring that for the trying to seek comfort and going to what was known, if that makes sense.
So okay, important themes. Important themes. Mm-hmm. Every one of these, unanswered prayers or no answered prayers, required, and mine was a little trivial. I was kind of like, mine's kind of a fun example, but like I've certainly had times like that too. Like I remember one of the big ones, like yours, stories come to mind for me is when I was never actually fired, but I was essentially kind of run out of the church that I helped build. Mm-hmm. And like, I remember being absolutely furious about it and feeling just completely powerless and having this like overwhelming sense from God, like that it was like, no, I'm not gonna, like, no, like, it's time to go, get out, it's time to go. And just like it was angry and painful and hard, you know? And that's what led me into chaplaincy. And that CPE experience at Tampa General Hospital ultimately shaped my calling. I suspect it will shape my entire rest of my life, you know? And it was hard and incredibly difficult, and like painful, and it required like 80 hours a week because I had to work another job to make ends meet. And like, it required a lot from me. And not just me, but from my girlfriend at the time, now wife. Like, it required a lot from like, we had a pretty good rhythm going where we could go out dancing and have fun, and we had a great, you know, I had a great career going, and like, it was all working, and like, it all just kind of, but I wouldn't be the person I am today had it not happened.
Right.
And there's something about the, like, it is often, in my experience, the very difficult, very painful things that we would otherwise, in a world that's completely to our choosing, we would otherwise avoid and not go through, that have such a drastic effect on not just us, but the people around us for the rest of our lives.
But I also think that is very different, and I'm sorry, this is where my brain immediately went, but that's very different than everything happens for a reason theology.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, and so here's the other thing I wanted to observe in both of your responses. It wasn't like when things came crashing down for, you know, and you're realizing what you're going to have to face now. You're going to have to lose this friendship. You're going to have to stick it out through this, you know, this year of whatever. The response isn't to then go, no, I'm happy.
Right.
God called me here, and so I'm going to be happy about it.
Right.
That's not how it works, and that's not what we see at Gethsemane. What we see at Gethsemane is who we believe to be the incarnate Word of God, one of the persons of the Trinity, like going, like, please don't make me do this. And like grieving, and other Gospels have him, they say he sweats blood. Like, that's the metaphor there. And I don't know if that's actually physiologically possible, but like, he's so grieved that he's sweating blood. Like, it's such a desperate plea. I don't want to do this. Like, that is not a guy who's going like, ah, man, if God's with me in the fire, then it won't burn. You know, like, this is a man who's looking at the face of he said explicitly, I'm going to be crucified, which is a hellish, torturous end to a life. And he's like, this is what I'm facing. I'm facing abandonment, loneliness, and then they're going to torture me to death. And he's not like put on a happy face. You know, he's grieved to the point of death, is what he says. You know, and like, I think that's an important lesson for us to learn. The other thing I want to point out is his disciples can't stay awake with him. So throughout the whole trajectory of Scripture, I think maybe the most important theme that is lifted up and occurs over and over and over again is God's desire is simply to be with his people. The Exodus story, where, you know, it's easy to get caught up in the like Pharaoh, let my people go, and the burning bush and the Moses story, but the real climax and the real point of the Exodus story is that the people are separated from God, their cry rises up, and God hears their cry, and the end of the book of Exodus is God coming down to dwell in the midst of his people who he has freed. And that's the point. And then the rest of the Old Testament kind of plays out with this like, can I be with you? Will you be with me? Will you stay with me? I want to be with you. Will you, you know, but you can't be with me and be ignoring the cry of the needy and ignoring widows and orphans. And like, you also have to be with me if you're going to be with me. And it culminates here in the crucifixion story. The last thing that happens to Jesus before he's arrested is that his people can't stay with him. And he says, let's do it anyway. Like, this is a radical statement about a new kind of God. You know, like all the gods that we've been told about and taught about prior to the Old Testament and New Testament God, they're gods who are petty. They're gods who would never sacrifice anything for people. You know, like, no, you sacrifice people for me. That's the relationship we have. And here we have, at the final moment, this story about even the people who are closest to Jesus can't stay with him in his most desperate hour. And he says, let's do it anyway. And I think that it's a radical statement about the kind of God we worship. And it's a very scary calling for those who would like to follow him. Because I can't stay with him. Like, I screw up all the time. I mean, we all do. That's kind of the point. And yet we have a God who is gracious and loving and forgiving and accepting enough and willing to do the hard thing that he absolutely does not want to do in order that we might be able to be with him anyway. So, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.